Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes, sir. Then again I'm falling. Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes, sir. Then again I'm falling. Let Jesus work it out. Please, your Father would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Please, your Father would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Please, your Father would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Oh, work it out. You work it out for Mother Lisa. Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes, sir. Then again I'm falling. Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes, sir. Then again I'm falling. Let Jesus work it out. Please, your Father would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Please, your Father would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Please, your Father would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Oh, work it out. You work it out for Mother.
Every night I praise and sleep. I pray to the Lord, my soul you keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray to the Lord, my soul you take. Every night I praise and sleep. I pray to the Lord, my soul you keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray to the Lord, my soul you take. Oh, Jesus, hold me.
All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today we're going to be talking about feral children, children raised by wild animals. And we're going to be reflecting a little bit about civilization, civility, and in a way, why we need each other to become fully human. But it's really then another gateway to dive deeper into actual historical cases of children raised by animals and sort of seeing what takeaways we can bring away from these as Christians and understanding our relationship and our communal relationship with each other. So that's what we got in store today. It should be a fun, relaxed stream. It's not going to be too verbose. It's not going to be too philosophical. It's going to be something that, again, sit back, relax, hang out for a little bit, a good little Monday night stream, if you will. And so this topic, you're probably wondering, Patrick, why did you do this topic? Well, I actually am doing this topic because I was scrolling social media, actually the now social media company known as X, formerly Twitter, and I saw an article on Dina Sanachar. And this is an Indian boy who was found, a gentleman actually was hunting wolves in India, and he happened to come across this Indian boy who was indeed raised by wolves and living as a wolf on all fours, eating raw meat, barking and growling and acting, and for all extensive purposes, as a wolf. And this became the basis for eventually we most know it as the Jungle Book, but it has to do with Rudyard Kipling's story about Mowgli. And this is the real historical basis from this. I was not fully aware. I've never really looked into Mowgli in the Jungle Book as a real historical story. Even though the Jungle Book, I don't know about for you guys, at least for me, the Jungle Book was one of my favorite Disney movies growing up. I think mine were like The Lion King, Aladdin, and the Jungle Book. Those were my favorite ones. So I saw this article and I thought, wow, that was fascinating. So we're going to read that article, but I got multiple articles and we're going to be looking at multiple different cases of feral children. And so, really interesting little study. And again, a lot to really take away in regards to the importance of these early developmental stages of children. Many of the cases we're going to be reading about today, these are very young children, usually could walk, that for one reason or another, as we'll read, find themselves out in the wild, be it a jungle, be it a forest, and are taken in by animals. We're going to be looking at cases for monkeys. We're going to be looking at what's called a chicken boy, a boy that was raised by chickens. We'll be looking at, obviously, wolves being one of the primary cases. Um, there's there is a dog girl from Ukraine. Again, another one who was sort of raised by wild dogs. So we'll be looking at all sorts of cases. It should be fun. If you guys have a specific case or know of a specific a case of a feral child, send it in. Send it in. We'll pull it up. We'll look at it. We'll go anywhere tonight. Again, like I said, it's sort of a relaxed stream. It's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of different stuff to get into. So before we get into the opening monologue here, I want to make a few quick announcements for everybody. And the first one is having to do with ways that you can support myself. So if you would like to support my work and what I'm doing, one of the best things that you could do is to become a website member. You can become a website member by going to davidpatrickcarey.com/register. Let me pull up right here. And so if you go here, no, that's not it. Let's see. Share screen, window. There we go. Here we go. Now, if you go here, davidpatrickcarey.com/register, you can become a website member. And this is my offer to you guys. I know you've heard me talking about become a member, but I'm really the memberships, whether you become a $5, a $15 fitness member, or a $25 premium member, you're really going to get your bang for your buck moving forward, especially this next year. As you guys know, I'm trying to finish up my PhD research, of which that is really oriented around transhumanism and looking at the philosophical framework of transhumanism, where it comes from, and then highlighting the divinization desires becoming godlike, a man becoming godlike through transhumanism, and comparing that with Orthodox doctrine of theosis, and showing how in ways these are subtle inversions of each other, though for somebody on the outside, they say, well, it's the same thing. It's about deification. I'm going to begin sharing. Again, I'm working on the dissertation now. I'm going to begin sharing all the books, all the research, all the intricacies for members. So it's not going to be limited to that. There's all types of topics that I do over there for members. But this is one of the best ways you can support me. And I'm going to be pumping out videos all the time over on the website for members. And so if you want to stay up to date with where I'm at, what I've been reading, what I've been researching, which are totally different than these public streams, by the way. I kind of live two lives, but these public streams are usually on various topics. But then what I do when we're not streaming are on totally different topics. All that stuff's going to be up at members. And so if you would like to help out, one, the community, help up my work, but then also in return, get academic, high-level education on my continued research on transhumanism and various other topics, as well as topics that aren't suitable for, let's say, certain platforms. Okay. So if you, again, we've seen something breaking out with Israel and Palestine right now. I want to start giving my opinions and my perspectives, my takes on much more controversial topics, which I tend to shy away from here on YouTube, over on the website for members. So those are the things that you can expect, and that'd be a great way to help me out. Also, if anybody wants to set up a one-on-one session or a series of one-on-one sessions where we talk about anything and everything that your heart desires. It could be theology, it could be philosophy, it could be the history of magic, could be setting goals, life development. I'll get into anything, I'll dive into any weeds that you prefer. You can do so by going to my website and signing up for a one-on-one session. I would greatly appreciate that, and anybody who would desire to do so. And I promise you'll get your money's worth, and you'll have my undivided attention. And then the last thing, if you really want to sponsor a stream, we have a sponsored stream coming in this week, most likely tomorrow or Wednesday. It depends on a few things. I got to hear back from some people. We'll be doing an introduction to Zoroastrianism. So I've been doing some research on that for that sponsored stream. We'll be looking at some of the intricacies of the Zoroastrian theology, often referred to as the first monotheism. We'll be looking at their fire worship and and steel manning their position, highlighting what they believed in and how that compares with our Orthodox Christianity, or Christianity generally speaking. So that is a sponsored stream coming up, as well as the next one after that, which I hope to do potentially this week or next week. It might be this coming Sunday, is the sort of theology of the Holy Spirit, and really elucidating what exactly who the Holy Spirit is, how we understand who he is, how we engage with him, Pentecost, the role in Scripture, all this different stuff. The goal is to sort of lay out the mystery of the Holy Spirit. Either Friday or Sunday. And I think I have a special guest that may be joining me Friday, so we'll see about that. But you'll definitely be getting tonight's stream, another stream on Zoroastrianism, and then another stream Friday, depending if that's a special guest or my stream on the mystery of the Holy Spirit. So that's coming up in regards to sponsored streams. Then shout out to AC. We got a couple more sponsored streams that he has sponsored. Also, totally unrelated to all that stuff, if you are in the market for some Orthodox stuff, one of the another best ways that you can support me is go over to orthodoxdepot.com. This is an Orthodox company right here in the Midwest who is providing anything that you might be looking for: icons, bracelets, prayer ropes, candles. If you're looking for some of this stuff, go to orthodoxdepot.com, put in promo code COTEL, COTEL, and that will help me out. I'll get a little bit of that, and you'll also get a 10% off discount. And so that's another great way that you can help me out and support the work. So God bless everybody. I really appreciate all my members, everybody who's sent in super chats over the years, and of course, everybody who sits and watches and listens to me ramble about various topics. So thank you guys so much, and God bless. Okay, now let's get into today's topic: feral children. Well, what are feral children? For those of you who don't know, feral children are children who, for all extensive purposes, are raised and considered isolation. So not all feral children are raised by animals. There's multiple cases. Was it Jeannie Walker being one case in which she was a young girl and her parents abused her and basically locked her, tied her to a toddler's toilet. And she was raised in sort of isolation in a room within the same house that her parents lived. That would be, in a way, considered a feral child because they lacked social exposure. They lacked linguistic development, all these different things. But what we're going to be focusing on today are those children that actually were raised by animals or were raised in the wild to some extent. And there's, as we'll read some of these stories, many different cases of how exactly a child winds up in the wild or finds themselves in a den full of wolves. But it's interesting nonetheless. And I think there's some real takeaways here. Now, I'll be up front doing a little research. Again, this is not a specialty at all. This was a topic that really piqued my interest, finding out about the historical Mowgli, or the Dina Sanachar, the gentleman who the Mowgli is based off of. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that's really a really good stream, because what it highlighted to me was not, obviously it was a sad case in the sense that we'll read Dina Sanachar ends up dying, I think, at the age of 35. He never really learned the language. He was able to wear human clothing and walk up straight on two legs. And he was able to cook or eat cooked food, which he typically ate raw meat. So his case is a case in which he didn't live very long after he was brought into the orphanage, unfortunately. But what's interesting is how it relates to civilization. And I want to bring this up here in a second. But in regards to feral children that were raised by animals, we know very little about their lives in the wild. One, it's a very, very rare occurrence. We have a few instances. We'll be looking at a woman in Colombia, so this is South America, who was raised by capuchin monkeys, that she was, again, usually these stories consist of some trauma, whether they had terrible parents. There's one instance of a Ukrainian girl whose parents were alcoholics, or may have been Russians. It's Russians or Ukrainians, anyways, had terrible parents, alcoholic parents, and they basically kicked her outdoors in the wintertime. And so it was so cold that she went and crawled up into some type of hut with dogs, wild dogs, and maybe wolves or some sort. And she lived there for years. What type of parent? So again, usually these circumstances, they're totally anormal, usually traumatic events, usually sometimes their parents die. This was, I think, well, again, we'll read. I read so many stories, I'm kind of blending them all together. But there was one instance where somebody's parents were murdered, and they basically fled into the forest or the jungle. And then usually some type of communal animal will then take them in as a young child. So we don't know much about their time in the wild, and there are many hoaxes regarding feral children. So I hope, God willing, all the ones that I expose you guys today, they're all historical, factual cases. Now, it's incredible how humans can take on the attributes of animals. This is one of the things that just blew me away about reading the story of Dina Sanachar, is that when they found him, and again, he was like a young adult, maybe a teenager or something. We'll read all these cases and find out more details here in a few. But they were talking about, and this is true for many feral children that were raised by animals, is that they become resistant to extreme temperatures, hot and cold. And I find this amazing. How is it that a child living out in the wild with animals can actually develop a resistance to extreme temperatures? They talked about it, instances where many of these children are totally naked or next to naked in their wild state, and yet it could be below freezing, it could be just above freezing, and they seem to not be affected in the same way that you or I would be. So what I want to point out, it's interesting how in different aspects, and I'm going to highlight civility and civilization and ways in which we engage in these higher uncreated energies of God. We're talking about theosis here, that unfortunately, many of these children, they are unaffected. So yes, they're unaffected by temperature, but they tend to lack any sort of linguistic ability. Typically, they go into the wild before they had totally learned the language. There's a few instances in where they're a little bit older and they did know some language before they went in, but there's very, very few cases in which these stories end real happily. Many such examples end where they're not totally functioning adults if they make it to adulthood, due to the traumas and the stress of potentially being taken in, being in human society. Many find it difficult to engage with humans and would typically refer back to and prefer the engagement with the type of animals that they grew up with. They typically eat raw food, obviously, because they're not creating fires and they're not cooking their stuff. That in almost all these cases, these animals just eat pure raw meat. And this was case for, again, Mowgli here, Dina Sanachar, is it took years before he would actually eat cooked food. He only preferred raw meat. And in some of these cases, these feral children, I mean, they would literally just kill an animal with their bare hands and just start eating it. So that's pretty interesting. They typically walk on all fours. Very few instances do we find feral children that walk upright. I found that really interesting. Typically, not on all cases, but typically, they begin to mimic other animals, which usually have four legs, and they themselves begin to walk on all fours. So I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting. The majority of the cases of children raised by animals don't engage with the animals on two legs, but get down on all fours. And like I said, they lack language, so they typically bark or communicate the same as the animals. And this has led many scholars to speculate, like, to what degree can they communicate with the animals? So for example, Mowgli here, or Dina Sanachar, to what degree could he actually communicate with the other wolves? They highlighted that even until he died at the age of 35, he would still howl at the moon. He would still howl. He never learned formal language. I think the extent of his linguistic facilities was yes and no. But they're how well, can they really communicate with these animals? Do they really are they seen as part of the pack? There are instances, for example, of feral children in which sometimes are there with a group, and then eventually the animals will turn on them, eat them, or that they're preyed upon by another animal out and that's really that's the story again of Mowgli, right? It's Shere Khan who wants to take the boy and eat him, and then it's the jaguar, it's the wolf, it's the bear that then there to protect him. So unsuccessful conversion of feral children back to normal. There's very few instances in which you take a child raised in the wild by animals that you can place right back into society, even through, let's say, 10 years of training. Typically not the case. And this highlights the immense importance of early childhood development, that your social skills, your linguistic skills, behavioral patterns, personality development. These things are essential during your early childhood, and they necessitate the existence of other people. You see, this is really interesting because you'll say, well, community, you're talking about community and being part of a group. Well, they're part of an animal group. Yes, but notice how they fail to become fully human. They fail to become fully human. To be fully human requires other humans. And this is part of our salvational theology within the Orthodox Church, is that we're saved collectively. We're not saved independently. And it highlights, when we look at children or people that are raised in total isolation, that they lack many of the qualities that we would associate with being fully human. And here's a few examples. That many children lack a full spectrum of human emotions. There was multiple children that I read about in preparation that could not cry. They could not cry. So they were raised with animals, but they had no ability to cry, even when immense pain was potentially they experienced, whether they stepped on something or whatnot. They couldn't cry. And that makes you think, Wow. So the spectrum of our human emotion is something that we shouldn't take for granted. This is a unique characteristic of ourselves. Not that animals don't feel pain. We know that certain animals mourn the death of others, elephants, whales, dolphins. But there's something about the spectrum of human emotion that is totally unique and that you don't develop without the presence of other people, whether they push you towards the state of pain where you cry, or just your mother being there to hold you doing again, there was something that I don't know what I fully think about this, but I thought it was fascinating that many of them can't cry. Many of them can't use language, obviously, because you have to be taught. And if they were not taught, or they were found at, let's say, an early state of like a teenager, and they had been out in the wild for, let's say, a decade, many of them couldn't learn language. They might be able to make sounds of a few words or a few concepts, but what we would consider a full functioning human with a full vocabulary and language, they never gained. Now, there's other instances of feral children that were found at a much younger age that they were able to talk to and educate. And eventually, they were able to grasp some sort of formal language. And then there's other cases of children that were already speaking and were given a language that then or go out in the wild. And so when they come back, it's sort of eventually a sort of refreshing, like a riding a bike, right? They didn't totally lose it. But in regards to the lack of human emotions and the spectrum of human emotions, there's multiple instances then with these children that they have no concept of stealing being wrong or violence done towards another person. And this is going to get real important when we talk about what exactly civility is. What is civility? And these kids cannot understand the idea that maybe somebody, and it makes sense, right? They're raised by animals. If you look at a group of animals and an animal wants something that another animal has, the dominant animal is going to have it. So they're going to then fight for it, tussle for it, or do whatever. And we see that these children are exactly the same, even when they're trying to be socialized or are brought into an orphanage or whatnot. They tend to have a real difficulty of relating to another person. Again, makes sense because there's nobody else there. But think about this theologically, right? I'm going to highlight how Christ civilized the world, but Christ calls us to love our neighbor as ourself. And if your neighbor is never there, one, I question the depth of which you can love oneself, but certainly the depth of which you can love another person, which is really interesting theologically to think about regarding some of these children. So the point I want to make then next is the importance of civilization. The importance of civilization. Now, many people would point out, whoa, Patrick, haven't you read the book of Genesis? Don't you realize who actually formed the first city? That was the murderous brother Cain when he killed his brother Abel. And that is true. That is true. But again, God turns all negatives into good. And I'm not here to say that all cities or all civilizations are equally good or that it's an end in of itself. It is not. But if the beginning point of our history is the Garden of Eden, and then we fall, and then again, out of the detritus of Cain's actions, he's removed from God. He goes to form a city, Enoch, that good things can happen. And in a way, this allows the development of us to become more human, that we are communal beings. This is the first and foremost importance when I think about civilization, is the endpoint from the Garden of Eden is the New Jerusalem, which is civilization. It is, in a way, a city. It's a place in which many people are coming together. Now, it's a pure city. It's a perfect city. It's a perfect civilization, ones that we lack here, obviously. But we are communal beings, and we cannot become fully human without each other. And as I said, this is essential to our theology as Orthodox Christians, that we are saved with each other. We are saved as the body of Christ. And the body of Christ are those who are communing with Christ. Again, community, communal relationships, communication, right? These are things that these feral children lack. And that we commune with God through the Eucharist. You are what you eat, as Father Alexander Schmemann used to say. And that's exactly what we become, the body of Christ. We commune with the body of Christ to then follow the true resurrected body of Christ, which is in heaven. And so we need each other to do that. You can't work out your salvation in total isolation. And in fact, that's sort of a satanic yearning, isn't it? It's sort of satanic to want to be totally alone. Now, get me, I am a bit of an introverted person. I like to read, I like to be by myself, I like my silence. So don't get me wrong there. But that's totally different from somebody who's basically totally divorced from society. And even in Orthodoxy, when we think about those extreme ascetics in those monastic communities, even those people within the Orthodox faith who renounce the world and marry Christ and become monastics, they still live communally. Very few instances does somebody just live out totally by themselves, and certainly not in a feral situation where they lack communication, they lack language, they lack the human spectrum of emotions and all this different stuff. So when we think about civilization, and when we think about ours, which I do, as I lay out this premise, I want to highlight that what's happening in the Western world is not just a collapsing of civilization, it's a reversion back to barbarous behavior, right? So, in a way, the collapsing of civilization is that many people are becoming more and more feral. When we think about the coom pods, when we think about the World Economic Forum, where you're not going to own anything, where you're going to live in a little bitty space that you rent, and you'll be given all the pleasures and the hedonism that you want, but you're sort of isolated, right? The evil one constantly wants to isolate us, divide us. And the way that we overcome this is by coming together and recognizing the divinity in each person. And so the Imago Dei within each other is essential for us to realize and enliven the Imago Dei within us. So therefore, theosis necessitates community. Theosis necessitates other people, because as we've talked about before, we don't love abstract things. When we think about the uncreated energies of God, love and truth and logic and reason and glory and honor and compassion and mercy, none of these things can be attained or fully embodied if you're in total isolation. You need other people. You need other people to embody the uncreated energies of God, again, which is three persons, one essence. Remember, our Trinity itself is descriptive of the communal relationship that necessitates being, right? And so the satanic spirit that wants to constantly divide and isolate, it's anti-being, it's anti-existence. It is a satanic death cult by nature, by essence, by its privation of anything dealing with God. So we then need other people that can choose to love us or not to actually engage in a true experience of love. We need somebody that we could step over or harm to actually embody true compassion and mercy towards somebody. We need each other. And sometimes we need other people to show us that compassion and mercy so that we then can aspire to rise to those levels to be better people. And so we see, again, theosis necessitates this structure of communal relationships. And even if we look at monastics and we look at ascetics, they're still not totally isolated, where they never speak with anybody or by themselves. And so civilization provides us with generations of knowledge. Now, civilization is a double-edged sword, because also we can look at the degeneracy, we can look at the sinful habits, we can look at the materialistic dimensions that people then become enamored by or often even worship due to the products, due to the wealth that civilizations can create. But civilization provides us with generations of knowledge and history. Again, if you're totally isolated, think about this, you'd have no history. Right now, we're sitting here, we're talking, we have an understanding of how the United States came into existence, how European peoples migrated to North America, how, again, civilizations developed. All these things are products of civilization existing and allowing us to contextualize and situate ourselves within the historical timeline. Without history, if we're all just back in barbarous tribes, or even maybe less than a tribal structure, there is no history. You see, it's ahistorical. And in a way, that's what they're trying to move us to, because monuments are a perfect representation of what civilizations do to remember who they are. And what have we seen, at least here in America, is a continual progressive push to destroy and undermine historical monuments. Whether you agree with Robert E. Lee or not, okay, maybe whatever. You could have the total opposite opinions and believe he was a terrible person, but the monument of him in whatever state, I forget what it was, South Carolina or something, somewhere in the South, um, then you forget the history. You don't know the history. And that's what we're seeing right now. As I talked about, if you don't know history, you're basically have amnesia. This is, I give credit where credit due. Even Terence McKenna mentioned this, and I think it's so true that the more you learn of history, the more you can understand who you are and how you situate yourself in the casuistry of life. So civilization is a pedestal that we all are able to live upon, that also gives us a sort of collective mind. Now, the collective hive mind can be negative, and we're seeing this at certainly right now in our societies due to the propaganda from Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Palestine, all this different stuff. I'm not going to get into details because I want to keep my stream up, but you get my point here, that we, as living in civilizations, also dealing with these sort of general culturally constructed, but also then transcendentals are holding these together, sort of hive minds of understanding, mathematics, architecture, language, value structures, morals, and ethics. These things sort of define us, but without civilization, we couldn't have these and continue to build atop of them. Now, again, my premise here is that what we're seeing in the 21st century is actually an eroding of civilization. And I would say we can see this by the eroding of civility. What is civility? Well, I think that one of the best quotes in regards to what civility is actually come from Mahatma Gandhi. I'm not a big Gandhi fan myself. I think there's a lot of interesting things. You start to get into the details of his story, but he says something that I do agree with, and that civility does not mean the outward gentleness of speech cultivated for the occasion, but an inborn gentleness and desire to do the opponent good. And even though opponent is a bit strong there, civility has to do with the ways in which we engage with each other in a civilized way. I have the etymology of civility pulled up here. Let me see if I can pull that up. So, and we can see that historically it has to do with, here we go, civility. So it's the status of a citizen, relating to a citizen, relating to public life, befitting of a citizen, popular, affable, courteous. Another definition, okay, behavioral proper to civilized persons. There was another definition about uh, ordered behavior and politeness, respectful politeness. These are things in which we should have towards each other, but we're seeing this breakdown of civility in our civilizations. And I'd say this is the breakdown of civilization, because as we looked at the feral children, remember, they have the inability to relate to the other person and actually care for the other person. This is the total opposite of Christ calling us to love our neighbors as ourselves, right? This is a breakdown in civilization. And so civilizations provide us with generations of knowledge and history. We can look at a civilization's architecture. We can look at a civilization's art. We can look at a civilization's monuments. We can look at these different ways in which civilizations express their value structure. And you look at our values. What great monuments and what great structures are we building in the 21st century? Not much. I mean, modern art is atrocious. There's a few structures that were built in like Chicago and New York that were recently. They were like pagan idols. One was the George Floyd monument thing. Weird stuff. Certainly not beautiful. Maybe for the people who created them intended them to be sort of transcendent and of deeper value, but certainly not aesthetic in any way. But what structures are we building as a society? Like football stadiums? And don't get me wrong, that's how I check out of the world as I go watch sports. But what do we build? We don't build great things in the Western world because, again, civilization has stopped. Civilization is eroding. We are becoming less and less civil. And so civilizations also provide us with shared communication, and that can't exist without civilization. We talked about these feral children and how they take on the communicative patterns of the animals that they're raised with, but that's not language and that's not higher thought. And so you can't do logical looking at logical statements, mathematical structures, rationalizing how something should be without language. Language is essential for these types of things. So community is, again, we talked about community, communication, communion. We commune with each other by having communities that communicate. That's what we're doing with God. That's why we're praying. We're belonging to the community of the church. We're belonging to the community of the saints. We're doing this through communication and communing through shared behavioral patterns and value structures. That we would lack the cognitive faculties to accurately map reality. And this is something that we found with feral children, is that sometimes feral children have a faulty perception of like distance and how things work. Why is that? Could it be that the Homo sapien, like our utilization of language is so important for us to actually map reality? And that perspective is actually sort of distorted without a linguistic map to actually put society on. It's something really interesting to think about. But again, we have no community. We have no communication, a structured language to cognitively map reality without civilization. Again, it's necessary. And a further extension of math, logic, diet, architecture, customs, all this stuff does not exist without civilization. The division of labor. Civilization affords us to specialize in certain tasks. Maybe they're your hobby, maybe they're not, maybe that's something you're good at, maybe you don't like it. But what we do in an ideally functioning civilization and society is that we can divide the labor, because certain people do this, certain people do that, and together in one day, look at all the things that are produced, as opposed to you having to do all this stuff by yourself. So division of labor affords a better well-being for all people. Again, civilization is the platform that allows this to happen. And then civilization teaches us, as I've been reiterating, to be civil. And first and foremost, Christ civilized the world. I did a stream called Christ Civilized the World. And what I was doing was building upon a paragraph out of a huge, thick book called The Silk Road by Peter Frankopan. I think he's a Harvard, Yale, one of those Ivy League schools. He's a historical scholar, and he writes a pretty good book about the Silk Road. I liked his book. But about his book, he is not a Christian. But one of the things that he does express is that Christianity, as it spreads specifically across the Middle East and would be South Central or Central Asia, it civilized those cultures to the point that it was warmly accepted. How did it civilize those cultures? Well, it prohibited cannibalism, incest, and homosexuality. These three things were greatly frowned upon by Christian communities. And when they encountered, in his book, he highlights, I forget, a Central Asian community that wasn't totally unheard of incest being a practice amongst family members, that Christianity wholeheartedly denounced these things. And again, what does it civilizes the society. And civility, as we've already highlighted, is about the caring of another person, loving your neighbor as yourself. And so Christ and Christianity aids in the civilization building process, building spaces in which we become more and more human, not less and less human, as we'll see with some of these feral instances. And so civilization teaches us to be civil and orderly behavior and respect, polite respect to others. And that's something that we lack because we lack the formalness of our societies. Look at our societies and the way people dress out in public, the way people speak out in public, the way people engage with each other. This is the breakdown of civilization. And in a way, as I've highlighted before, this is us becoming more and more like animals. And we can see this on a daily basis. We can see this through these protests that are emerging. But we've been seeing it for decades now, that the West, America, is becoming less civilized and more animalistic. And so these are ways in which civilization can actually help us. So there's that, guys. Smash that like for everybody who's still here. I want to highlight that if anybody wants to show some support, please send in a super chat using the Streamlabs link or the Dono chat link, or here on YouTube. We got one that came in over on Dono chat. It comes from Blue Skittle and says, my favorite streamer covering my favorite childhood movie, best character. Well, thank you, or Ka being the best character. Thank you so much, Blue Skittle, for the $20 super chat. Truly appreciate that. Thank you so much for your support. And yeah, this should be a fun stream. And now we're going to be getting into a lot more fun stuff. And so the first thing that I want to do is read a little bit about Dina Senachar. So this is the real story of Mowgli. Mowgli, for those of you unaware, which I'm sure you're aware, is the central character, the protagonist of the Jungle Book. And so he's the fictional character and the protagonist of Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book series. He is a feral boy from the Pinch area in Sonoy, Madhya Pradesh, India, who originally appeared in Kipling's short story In the Ruck, and then became the most prominent character in the collections of The Jungle Book and the Second Jungle Book. That's in 1894 through 1895, which also featured stories about other characters. Okay, so Mowgli, this character, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, he's actually a real person, Dina Senachar. And so this is the feral boy who inspired the Jungle Book. And this is what he looked like. You can see his eyes were crossed. He was what looks to be a bit malnourished. But if you're a fan of the Jungle Book, you'll want to read about Dina Senachar, the real life Mowgli. Senachar was born in the jungles of India and has spent his entire life living among animals. Dina was Rudyard Kipling's inspiration for the uplifting tale, but many people don't realize Dina's tragic story. In this post, we will take a closer look at the life of Dina Senachar and learn more about his incredible story. So he existed from 18. Well, no, he was older than that. So I guess this photo is somewhere between 1889 and 1894. The Wolf Boy is found. Dina Senachar's story began in the 1800s when he was just a young boy. In 1867, a group of hunters tracked a wolf in the jungles of the Uttar Pradesh, India. The wolf led the hunters to a small cave where they found a naked boy huddled in the corner. Upon trying to communicate with the boy, they realized that he could not answer them, nor did he seem to understand their questions. With each passing moment, it became more evident that the wolf boy was a feral child. It was apparent that the wolves raised the boy, and despite the odd nature of his upbringing, he was not the first feral child. Back then, feral children were typical in India, including panther children, chicken children, dog children, and even gazelle children. Yeah, there's a story about a boy that fled into the Sahara and he lived amongst a wild group of gazelles. I thought that was wild. Again, we'll read more of this stuff as we move through the stream. So smash that like. Make sure to send in some super chats if you want to show some love. Use the Streamlabs, use the YouTube, or use Dono Chat. All those would be greatly appreciated. So we see India, and in many cases of the feral children, we can point to India for one reason or another. Certainly, they have a high density population, but it's many of our cases we see come from India or Africa or South America. We do have one case of a French boy, and we'll get to that here in a few. A common trait with feral children was their inability to walk on two legs. Almost always, they walked on all fours and struggled to walk correctly. The hunters who found Dina took him back to their village, where they showed him off to the locals. The villagers were both fascinated and terrified by the boy raised by wolves. Next, the hunter took Dina to the Sikandara Mission Orphanage, or the Sikandara, whatever, in Agra. They gave him the name Senachar, which means Saturday in Urdu, because that was the day he was found. So I guess Urdu must have been more. Let's just find out where exactly where is Here we go. Let's find out where this actually is so we can get a better map in India where exactly this takes place. Okay. Okay, so this is northern India up here. So we see certainly northern India where this gentleman was found. Another one was over by Myanmar, where we'll find the oldest case of a feral person who lived in the wild for 38 years. 38 years, and that would have been over here. But okay, so now we know exactly where he was. Um, Dina Senachar's early years. Although Dina was given a name and a roof over his head, the orphanage was not the best place for him. The staff at the orphanage did their best to care for Dina, but they didn't know how to communicate with him properly. Father Erdhard, the head of the orphanage, felt that even though he considered Dina an imbecile, he did show signs of intelligence and critical thinking. They also didn't know how to care for his physical needs. The staff at the orphanage did their best to civilize Dina, but it was a difficult task. His upbringing in the jungle was the only source of civilization that made sense to him. He would often howl and bark like a wolf, leading the staff to believe he was trying to communicate with them. A psychologist named Wayne Dennis noted that feral children like Dina had little to no attachment to human beings and were unaffected by hot and cold temperatures. And this was something that I found was true for multiple cases, that these children were unaffected by extreme temperatures. I thought that was fascinating. Dina wore clothing after many years, but he only ate meat and sharpened his teeth on bones like a wolf. At the same time, Dina seemed unable to speak a language, but his caretakers were hopeful that they could rehabilitate him. Dina Senachar's later years. As Dina grew older, he began to show more human like behaviors. He learned how to use the restroom. He ate normally, dressed, walked upright, and even started wearing shoes. However, the wolf boy continued to howl and bark, which led people to believe he was trying to communicate with him. Here we can again see him on all fours here. Dina would never learn to speak the human language, yet he developed a sense of understanding and could share in his way with the caretakers of the orphanage. While the caretakers had limited success bonding with Dina, the wolf boy did form a bond with another feral child. The two children had much in common and they quickly became friends. They would often play together, and Dina would teach the other boy to hold a cup and drink out of it. It was clear that Dina was more comfortable around other feral children than he was around humans. That never seemed to change even as Dina grew older. Dina Senachar's death. Despite spending the better part of 20 years at the orphanage, Dina made little more progress in his transformation to more human behavior. For example, even though he ate from a plate, he would always smell his food first and never seemed to want anything but raw meat. Unfortunately, dressing and walking upright weren't the only human characteristics that Dina adopted in his time at the orphanage. So here is a picture of him where he was able to actually wear human clothes, and you can see that his eyes were a bit cross-eyed, it looked like. So were these developmental problems before he was feral, or was this something that developed by being feral? It's hard exactly to say, but here is a picture of Dina Senachar. Oddly enough, Dina picked up the habit of smoking cigarettes from the caretakers. It's not clear why he started smoking, but it's speculated that he may have thought it made him look more human. In any case, smoking took a toll on Dina's health as he developed a chain smoking habit that eventually died of tuberculosis in 1895. Senachar lived a short, very short life and died at the age of 34. 34. What does Dina Senachar's life teach us about civilization? Dina Senachar was a unique individual. He was raised by wolves and spent his formative years in the jungle. Even though hunters took him to an orphanage, he never really learned how to be human. Again, highlighting, as we said in the opening monologue there, the importance of these early developmental stages of an adolescence. That early childhood development is huge for your personality, for your linguistic facility, for your understanding to relate socially to other people. All of this he had black because he lived all his formative years in the jungle with a pack of wolves. In some ways, Dina Sanachar will always be more wolf than man. You could try to take the boy out of the jungle, but you can't take the jungle out of the boy. Dina Sanachar's story tells us that civilization is learned, not something instinctive. Again, I was thinking when I read that, because this was the article that really got me thinking. It's like, man, how does this relate to the fall? How does this relate to our sort of fallen nature? And how, again, civilization is something that actually allows us to lift ourselves up and become more human, more in the image of God, because we have each other. We have the various Imago Days around us to lift us up. Dina Sanachar never learned how to be human, but he still impacted the world. His story teaches us that even the most pharaohs have the potential to civilize others and make the world a better place. Yet Dina's story makes us question what it means to be human. What caused these children to become feral? Is it inherent in human nature or something that is learned? Dina Sanachar's story reminds us that we should never give up on anybody, no matter how feral they seem. There is always hope for her rehabilitation and redemption. It is also a reason to consider society's failings and question how children are raised. Again, think about how children are being raised now. Think about the early exposure, the taking away of innocence from children, the sexualization of our society, these, prepubescent girls, children, boys, like twerking and doing sexual stuff. This is horrendous. This is, again, the collapse of civilization. These are learned characteristics, just like the children that learn how to fetch, prey, and act like a wolf. Are we doing enough to teach them about civilization? Are we really teaching civility to people? Are they really becoming the most human versions of themselves? Or are we raising them in a way that makes them more likely to become feral? Now, I want to, we'll break this up and we'll play a quick video here about 10 children raised by animals. But there's another article that I found talking about Dina Sanachar that's pretty good. We're not going to read the whole thing, but this has a little bit more details. The other one was a great overview. So I want to read a little bit of this, but before we do that, I think we should break it up by watching a little bit of a clip video here. So here we go. Let's check this out. Make sure we're connected. Okay. So everybody can see that. Let's check this out.
Number 10, Dina Sanachar, the wolf boy of Sikandra. Dina was discovered at the age of 6 when hunters in the jungles of Bulandasar saw him follow a wolf running on all fours. Before living with wild wolves, he was one of the boys who lived at the Sikandra orphanage. After returning back to civilization, Dina remained wild, tearing off clothes and eating raw meat from the ground for a long period of time. Unfortunately, he didn't learn to speak and died at the age of only 35. Number 9, Bello the chimp boy. Bello was a 2-year-old boy when he was found in a group of chimpanzees after being abandoned by his parents due to being both mentally and physically disabled. Bello walked like a chimpanzee, using his legs but dragging his arms on the ground. After being rescued and brought to a children's home, he showed no signs of human behavior, disturbing the other children and throwing things around. Sadly, Bello died soon after in 2005. Number 8, Daniel, the Andes goat boy. Abandoned in the Andes as a small child, Daniel joined a herd of wild Peruvian goats and lived with them for 8 years, eating berries, roots, and nursing milk from female goats. He walked on all 4 limbs, and his feet were hardened so much they acted like hooves. He couldn't learn human language, and not much is known of what happened to him after he was brought back to civilization. Number 7, the Syrian gazelle boy. A boy aged around 10 was found in a herd of gazelles in the Syrian desert. They caught him with the help of an army jeep because he could run at speeds of up to 50 kilometers per hour. After being captured barefoot and naked, not a lot is known where he was kept afterwards. The Syrian gazelle boy was seen alive a few years later when he made an attempt to escape from an unpleasant state institution that he was kept in. Number 6, Kamala and Amala, the wolf girls of Mindapur. Amala was about 18 months old, while Kamala was 8 years old when they were found in a wolf's den. The girls had no trace of humanness. They would tear off any clothing that was put on them. They would only eat raw meat, and they only came awake after the moon rised. Unhappily, before their rehabilitation had started, the younger girl, Amala, sickened and died. Number 5. John Sabunya, the Ugandan monkey boy. After seeing his mother murdered by his own father, 3-year-old John ran away from his home in Uganda. Afraid for his own life, he hid in the forest where a few vervant monkeys found him. He lived with them, learning how to forage and climb trees for several years. When he was found by a hunter and brought back to civilization, locals thought he was an evil spirit and wanted to put him to death. Luckily, John was returned into society and even learned how to speak. Number 4. Vanya Yudin, the bird boy. Vanya Yudin from Russia was found at the age of 7 in a Volgograd apartment filled with caged birds. He didn't understand any human language because his single mother refused to speak to him. Instead, he was chirping and flapping his arms like a bird. He was temporarily transferred to an asylum, but later sent for psychological care, where they immediately started his rehabilitation. Number 3. The cat boy. Back in 2008, Argentinian police discovered an abandoned 1-year-old boy surrounded by 8 wild cats. As they approached the child, the cats became very protective and even aggressive. The police found that the cats had been keeping the child alive during the harsh winter by constantly licking him and staying on top of him. The boy was given back to his homeless father, who claimed that those cats always took care of his son when he wasn't able to. Number 2. Traian Calderar, the Romanian dog boy. Traian is a Romanian boy who was separated from his family in the wild for 3 years. It is believed that he left the family home because of violence from his mother's partner. He was found near the body of a dog that he had been eating, suffering from infections and injuries as well as his poor circulation. He learned to survive on his own with assistance from the stray dogs in the Transylvanian countryside. He was kept in an orphanage for a while till the authorities ruled his mother to take him back and look after him. Number 1. Oksana Malaya, the Ukrainian dog girl. Oksana spent her childhood living in a dog hole in the back garden of the family home in Ukraine. Although she did spend some time in the house with her alcoholic and careless parents, she was cared for by the dogs and learned their behaviors. When found, she growled, barked, walked on all fours, and sniffed at her food before she ate it. Oksana was taken to a home for the mentally handicapped, where she was rehabilitated, and she now lives and works there.
Anyways, that's some wild stories, right? One of the ones that they didn't include that I wanted to show you guys was the case of a chicken boy, a boy that was raised by chickens. So check this one out real quick.
I've already discovered that as a young child, Sujit lived with chickens for so long, he started to behave just like them and would lash out when people tried to touch him. I'm told he was found in the street and brought to this home. Salesh takes me to the place where he was kept. This is where he lived?
This is where he lived.
How long was he here for?
From 1978 till 2003 or 4.
He was here for 25 years?
Yep.
This is where he spent his whole life?
Yes.
So this corner is where the bird boy grew into a man. What I'm fascinated to know is whether the bird-like behaviours that Sujit had learnt as a child stayed with him into adulthood. Is this where he ate?
This is what his corner. So we'll bring his plate, put it here,
And what would he do?
and he will tip it over.
Yeah.
He'll tip it over, move the plate aside, and then start picking his bread with porridge and eating. So he has to pick his food and eat.
It's shocking to hear just how deeply ingrained Sujit's feral ways were. Although he was fed and occasionally cleaned, Sujit seems to have received no specialist help. And so his bird-like ways remained. The bird boy had become the fully grown bird man.
Wild stuff, right? Smash that like for everybody who's out there. I know this can be a bit dark. I saw shout out to Baselet Analyzer says dark. Yeah, it can be a bit dark. It's a bit traumatic and sad for these children. And again, it highlights one of the things that I was reflecting on and leading up is like how these feral children is that the animals in which they adopt the children, say it be wolves or chickens or whatever. I think there's another case of a woman that was raised by monkeys. That it seems like the monkeys, maybe this isn't the case, but it seems like have a more of a difficult time distinguishing the difference between a human and themselves. Whereas we as humans, especially once we are becoming fully human, we are distinctly not like the animal kingdom. Again, it has to do with all these uncreated energies, these higher faculties that we're able to participate in, being made in the image of God. We can participate in things like logic. We can participate in things like objective truth and morality, objective morality. Again, in these uncreated energies like compassion and mercy and honor and glory. Yeah, the animal kingdom has semblances of these things, but not to the same degree as us. We are unique. We have a unique ontology on this planet. And so it's interesting that the degradation is that those lower animals, obviously, they're not to the state of us, cannot distinguish the difference. Well, we can. We are clearly not the same when we live up to what we're capable of. So I wanted to highlight that. Also, guys, if anybody out there has some cases of feral children or a good YouTube video or an article, feel free. I'd love to play that, share it, or read it for you guys. So if you have anything, send it in. Let's see here. I wanted to read some of this to you guys. This is another article on Mowgli. Did feral children exist in India? And this is a bit of an interesting one. And this was written recently, right? Today, it looks like it was updated. So shout out to Willie Jenkins, renews his membership. God bless you, Willie Jenkins. God bless you, brother. He says, participate in numbers. Please do. Would greatly appreciate that. Thank you, Willie Jenkins, brother, for always being a supporter, for always doing your part. God bless you, man. Thank you so much for being part of the COTEL crew for 7 months. 7 months. 7 months, man. Willie Jenkins, God bless you, bro. Thank you very, very much. So I want to read a little bit of this to you guys here. Let's see. We'll start here. Obviously, you guys now know a little bit about Dina Sananchar, but was Mowgli real? Did a boy like him really exist in some remote forest in India living with wolves? Was Kipling's story some real-life incident? Probably the best known and widely published story. Let's see here. Of feral children in India was the two girls, Amala and Kamala, claimed to have been recovered from a wolf den in 1920 in the then undivided Bengal's Midnapore district. The story goes a local priest, Joseph Amrito La Singh, saw a mother wolf and cubs, two of whom had long matted hair and looked human. After considerable preparations and difficulties, the two human creatures were captured. They turned out to be girls. The creatures were taken to an orphanage in Mindapore, where the Reverend and his wife were stationed. Singh described them as wolfish in appearance and behavior. He said the girls walked on all fours, had calluses on their knees and palms in doing so. In September of 1921, both girls became ill, and Amala, the younger, died. The story attracted attention and debate. After the news broke out, anthropologists and doctors cast doubts on its veracity as the account was reported and promoted by one source, Singh himself, who claimed to have discovered the girls. Finally, a French surgeon concluded in his book that the story was a hoax. The then best account of wolves nurturing children in their dens is contained in an obscure pamphlet printed at Plymouth in 1852 with the title An Account of Wolves Nurturing Children in Their Dens. The author of this pamphlet was Major General Sir W.H. Sleeman. This pamphlet had detailed 6 cases of wolf children, excerpts from which were produced in Sleeman's journey through the kingdom of Oud, What Sleeman wrote was, wolves are numerous in the neighborhood of Sultanpur, and indeed all along the banks of the Gumti River, among the ravines that intersect them, and a great many children are carried off by them from towns, villages, and camps. Sleeman's writings on the whole gives an idea of how numerous wolves were in the then Uda or Awada. So severe were the depredations they carried out that Sleeman says that a particular kind of nomads used to make a living by selling gold and silver bracelets, necklaces, and other ornaments which were worn by the children, whom the wolves carry back to their dens and devour, and left at the entrances of these dens. Sleeman says in February of 1850, a wolf boy was found in Condor, 10 miles from Sultanpur, and caught. There is now, in February 1850 at Sultanpur, a boy who was found alive in a wolf's den about 2 years and a half ago. The trooper was sent to the native governor of the district of Condor to demand payment of some revenue. Was passing along the bank of the river near Condor about noon when he saw a large female wolf leave her den, followed by 3 whelps and a little boy. The boy was on all fours and seemed to be on the best possible terms with the old dam, and the 3 whelp and the mother seemed to guard all 4 with equal care. They all went down the river and drank water without perceiving the trooper, who sat upon the banks watching them. As soon as they were about to turn back, the trooper pushed on to cut off and secure the boy, but he ran as fast as the whelps could and kept up with the old one. The ground was uneven, and the trooper's horse could not overtake them. They all entered the den, and the trooper assembled some people from Condor with pickaxes, who dug into the den. When they dug out 6 or 8 feet, the old wolf bolted, and her 3 whelps and the boy. The trooper mounted and followed the fleetest young man of the party, who secured the boy and let the old dam and her 3 cubs go on their way. Sleeman recounts, the men took the boy to the village and had to tie him, for he was very resistive and struggled hard to rush into every hole or den they came near. The boy growled and snarled. He rejected when any cooked meat was put near him, but when any raw meat was offered, the boy seized it with avidity, put it on the ground under his hands like a dog, and ate it with evident pleasure. The boy was handed over to the Raja of Hansapur, who then handed him over to one Captain Nicolet, the officer in charge of the 1st Regiment of Oud Local Infantry of Sultanpur. The boy lived under the care of the captain's servants for almost 2 years and suddenly died in August 1850. Yeah, unfortunately, not many of these cases have happy endings. Just FYI. At Chupra, 20 miles east of Sultanpur, a wolf boy was caught in 1849 when his wolf family came out of the jungle and go down to the stream to drink water. He was later identified based on his birthmark and a hot water scalding mark as a cultivator's son had been lifted by a she-wolf from the village almost 6 years ago. In 1843, a shepherd of the village, Gutkori, sorry, that's all Indian stuff, 12 miles from the cantonments of Sultanpur, saw a boy walking on all fours by the side of the wolf as he was out of the flock. The boy was caught with great difficulty and escaped into the jungles when the shepherd was asleep. In 1867, hunters near Bulandashar rescued a young boy from a wolf den and took him to Agra Medical Missionary Training Institute. He was christened Dina Sanachar, the boy who was born on Saturday, as he was brought to the missionary on Saturday. According to Valentine Ball, a pioneer geologist working at the Geological Survey of India and accompanied the ornithologist, wrote the most detailed portrait of Sanachar in his book, Jungle Life in India, and said Sanachar was the only known wolf boy who survived into adulthood and died due to tuberculosis in 1895. Despite more than 20 years at the orphanage, nobody could get him to speak, but he did manage to train him to wear clothes and eat cooked food. 2 cases reported elsewhere, one from Shahjapur, tested by 2 different military officers, and another at 1860 and 1861. The most talked about was the case in 1972 when Shemedo, a 4-year-old boy, was discovered in the forest. He had dark nails, sharp teeth, and fingernails that looked like hoods. The boy had severely matted hair and tough calluses on his elbows and knees. The boy enjoyed hunting chickens and bonded with dogs fast. He never learned to speak and did some sign language and was admitted to Mother Teresa's home for the destitute and dying and died in 1985. The boy was found in the forest of Musa Firkhana, 20 miles from Sultanpur. One may wonder why almost always boys aged between 8 and 12 years of age and not a single case of a wolf man that was reported. Yeah. So that's that. Here are some other examples that we can go through that you may have heard of. 10 cases of feral children, the girl of Champagne, rags to riches. This is more of a happy ending. So make sure you smash that like for everybody who's still here. Feel free to show some love if you'd like. I greatly appreciate that. Let's see. The number 10, rags to riches, feral child Marie Angelique Mimi LeBlanc was reportedly born in Wisconsin in 1712. According to LeBlanc, when she was around 7, she was painted black and sold as a slave. She was traveling with a Canadian woman to France when the ship sunk, but LeBlanc and another girl made it to shore and began living in a French forest, foraging on roots, killing small animals, and eating their raw flesh. Eventually, the two girls parted ways. One day, villagers spotted LeBlanc stealing apples and sicked a bulldog on her. LeBlanc killed the dog with one blow and ran up a tree, escaping capture by swinging from branch to branch like Tarzan, disappearing back into the forest. A nobleman ordered she be captured. When she was finally caught, she emitted a disturbing animal sounds. At the time, professionals estimated her age to be between 10 and 18 years old. Unlike many feral children, LeBlanc learned to speak and became fluent in French. In the decades to come, she became a woman of influence in Paris. She met with royalty and attracted admirers the world over thanks to her exotic personal history. Marie LeBlanc died a wealthy woman in 1771. So that is a very happy case. That's a very happy case in this instance. But notice that she was able to adopt things because she was, what was it? She was around 7 years old when she was taken. So she clearly already had language skills. She already clearly knew English, having grown up in Wisconsin. So a little bit different there. Peter the Wolf Boy of Hanover. How many of you guys have heard of that one? So Peter the Wolf Boy of Hanover. Let's get back to it. Peter's story is another one of the earliest recorded instances of a feral child. In 1725, Peter was found living, some would say existing, in a German forest. He walked on all fours like a dog or wolf and foraged for plants to eat. When he was captured, he was handed over to the local count for safekeeping. Peter couldn't speak, but made sounds described by locals as sounding like an orangutan. No doubt, he was looked upon as a wild fascination, not unlike an animal in a zoo. Eventually, Peter was shipped off to England and placed under the protection of King George I. The courtiers for a time were fascinated by his most undomesticated soul. When they were bored of him, he was sent to live with a farm family where Peter happily spent his days repeatedly loading up a cart with animal dung and then dumping it out. Peter loved the autumn nature and would often venture into the woods to search for acorns to eat. Sometimes Peter traveled far during the autumn outings and didn't know how to get back home. The kindly farmer who looked after him had a metal collar made for Peter that locked around his neck. The outside of the metal band was engraved with Peter's name, address, and a message saying, "If you find Peter, please return him to this address and you will be paid for your trouble." Peter died in February of 1785. To this day, flowers are left on his churchyard grave. Feral children raised by orangutans. The next feral child story unfolded in the 21st century on the island of Borneo, bordered by the northwest by the South China Sea. and by the Sulu Sea to the northeast. In the jungles of Borneo, a young boy uh, was spotted by the locals living in the wild. After 2 years of failed attempts, the authorities managed to capture the little boy in 2014. Doctors guessed his age to be somewhere between 4 and 7 years old. Amazingly, he was living with a congress of fierce orangutans who took exception to the boy being taken from them. 4 of the creatures had to be subdued with tranquilizer darts before officials could grab the child. Initially, the boy was nervous, but doctors eventually won his trust. They examined him and found the boy to be surprisingly in good health despite living and eating wild. At the time of his capture, the boy exhibited no signs of human socialization. With help of social services, this feral child began the rigorous task of learning how to live and act like a normal child. Oof, wild stuff. Hey, shout out to Jesse. We got a super chat that just came in on Streamlabs. Shout out to Jesse throwing in $5. Jesse says, was Adam feral before Eve? Why or why not? No, Adam was not feral before Eve because Adam was made as an adult. The idea that for Adam to be feral, of course he was not. He would have to have been a child who didn't have language, who had no cognitive faculties or understanding. Adam was made as an adult. Eve was made as an adult. They were not children in diapers or toddlers that needed help or nurturing. In all the cases of these feral children, animals helped nurture the child so that it could continue to grow into the future. Adam, that was not the case. So even though I get your point that he was by himself or lacked a sort of community, it wasn't long until Eve was there. So it wasn't like he lived a long life by himself. So thank you, Jesse, for the $5 super chat. I appreciate that. Okay. Again, if anybody wants to send in a super chat, please do so. Use either the Streamlabs link or the Dono chat. Both are in the video description. Or if you prefer YouTube, feel free to use YouTube. I would greatly appreciate any of that. Make sure to smash that like if you're still here. Okay, next one. This is the case of the oldest case of a woman living in, or a person living in the wild. So this is a wild one. In 1974, and forgive me, I don't know how to pronounce this woman's name, Nig Chahidi and her male cousin, also 4 years old, disappeared into the jungle outside their small East Indian village on the border of Myanmar. A heavy rainstorm washed away any tracks of their travel. 5 days later, Nig's cousin was found, but there was no signs of Nig. Nig was eventually given up for dead, and the family and village moved on the best they could. However, for decades, people talked about seeing glimpses of a woman living in the jungle. In 2012, at the age of 42, Nig Chahidi was found living naked in a cemetery in Myanmar. She was taken in by a woman who eventually crossed paths with Nig's father 3 years later and saw a family resemblance between the two. Based on Nig's birthmark on her face and the fact that she was left-handed, Nig was reunited with her father and mother, who believed their daughter had been dead for decades. Isn't that wild? So, I didn't even, sorry guys, I didn't make that. My bad. So that's wild. This is what she looked like, by the way. No. Let's see. Right there you go. Here's a photo of her. This is Nig Chahidi, 38 years living in the jungle. And again, naked, right? It's amazing how the human body can adapt so much where all of a sudden they are not affected by temperatures and weather the same way that we are. I find that incredible. Oop. So that's a picture of her right there. Next one, the bird boy. Number 6, the bird boy. The feral child named Prava was discovered at age 7, living with his mother in a small 2-bedroom apartment in Russia. We saw this one in the video. In her early 30s at the time, the mother kept one room filled with cages holding the dozens of birds she owned. Sadly, She kept her son in the same room as the birds and never spoke to him. Can you imagine that? Again, that's what's so horrific, the trauma. Can you imagine having a son and you never speak to him? When Prava was found, he couldn't talk. Instead, he chirped like a bird. After being rescued, if Prava grew frustrated, he flapped his arms and hands like a bird. This is the Ukrainian dog girl. So Oksana Malaya. One of the best documented cases of a feral child is an 8-year-old Ukrainian girl discovered in 1991 in the farming village of Nova Blagvishchenka. Oksana Malaya was born in 1983, but was neglected by alcoholic parents. As a result, Oksana lived and grew up amongst dogs. When she was discovered, she was living in a kennel with dogs. It's estimated she'd been living with the dogs since age 2. One night when Oksana was left outside by her parents, she sought warmth and crawled into the nearby dog kennel and curled up with the dogs. The comfort the dogs offered no doubt conveyed to the child that here at last was a safe place. By the time the authorities were alerted and came for Oksana, her overall behavior was extremely dog-like. She walked on her hands and feet, bared her teeth, and barked if someone came too close. She knew only 2 words, yes and no, but lacked the basic human skills like bathing. Instead, she groomed herself just like dogs do. Oksana was placed in a foster facility for developmentally impaired children. It took years of both special therapy and schooling to undo the damage. Over time, Oksana did learn how to speak. Today, she milks cows for a living. Doctors believe that Oksana will never fully overcome her intellectual impairment. During a 2013 interview on a Ukrainian television show, she stated that she disliked being referred to as the dog girl. She just wants to be treated as a normal person. Oksana's hopes and dreams entail seeing her brothers more often and finding her mother one day. Sad. Sad. The chicken boy. The chicken boy. Oh, we got another super chat that came in. Shout out to my man, Thomas Henderson. God bless you, brother. Premium member, longtime contributor, longtime supporter of the stream. Thomas Henderson sends in $20. Thank you so much, Thomas. He says, helping you out, my brother. Thanks for the walk on the wild side. Tarzan was an early illustration of modern literature that touched on this topic. Absolutely. That's what's so wild to me is I had heard of feral children or children being isolated until I read the article and then started looking into like feral children raised by animals. I didn't realize to the extent and the fact that like Tarzan, there actually are cases of children being raised by monkeys, orangutans, as we saw, that take on their habits and properties. That blew me away. And so maybe it's not to the same extent as, the Jungle Book or the Tarzan narratives illustrate, but the fact that there's a basis for all this in reality is pretty mind-bending. And again, it shows you the importance of civilization, the importance of each other, the importance of how we become more and more human. So thank you so much, Thomas Henderson, for the $20 super chat. I greatly do appreciate that. God bless you, brother. And next Wednesday, not this Wednesday, but next Wednesdays, we have another premium meeting. So thank you so much, Thomas Henderson. Thank you very much. Okay, getting back to number 4 here. Let's go for bam. The chicken boy, which again you saw a little bit of. In many cases, authorities don't know how children become feral, but with Sajit Kumar, it was evident what happened. In 1978, on the island of Fiji, Sujit was found living in a chicken coop. His parents banished him to the coop due to behavioral problems. When his mother committed suicide, Sujit's grandfather took over care of the boy, but still made him live in the chicken coop. At the age of 8, Sujit was discovered one day in the middle of the road, flapping and clucking like a chicken. After being rescued, it was discovered his fingers were turned inward during feeding time. He would peck at his food like a chicken, crouch on his chair like a chicken, roosting, and communicate by making a clicking noise with his tongue. Again, as I mentioned earlier, for those of you who weren't here, Scholars don't know to the degree that a feral child can actually communicate with the animals that raised him. So him clucking and making noises like a chicken. Some people say they absolutely can communicate. They're absolutely communicating with the chickens, for in this case, or the other animals. Others speculate to the degree. Clearly, they are communicating. Some question the degree, but very interesting nonetheless. Amala Kamala, we just read about them. They were abandoned by their families and were mothered by a female wolf. They were described as having retreating foreheads and lower jaws that protruded, not unlike the wolf that mothered them. It should be noted that over the years, the authenticity of the story has been questioned. This was the one that the French gentleman said was a hoax. The Chilean dog boy. At 5, an unnamed boy from southern Chile was tossed out of his home by his abusive parents. Eventually was placed in a children's home, but 2 years later escaped and began living a feral life in the streets of Talcahuano with a pack of 15 stray dogs. They would scavenge for food on the streets, but all lived in a cave on the city's outskirts. In 2001, when authorities were alerted to how the boy was surviving, they closed in on him. To avoid being caught, he jumped into the cold waters of the Pacific Ocean, but was rescued by a policeman who dived in after him. He was filthy, dressed in dirty rags, and his hair was matted. After a day of recovering in the hospital, professionals took the boy to another children's hospital. He showed signs of depression along with signs of aggression. Although he wasn't speaking much, he could talk intelligible words if he chose to. The Syrian gazelle. We did read, watched briefly in the quick video that I showed you guys. This nameless feral boy was reported to be lost at the age of 7. He was reported living in a northern province in the Sahara Desert with a herd of gazelle in the 1940s. An anthropologist traveling in the area managed to contact the boy, who was surviving on grasses and roots. The boy was described as exhibiting the mannerisms of gazelles. He twitched his muscles, ears, nose, and scalp. He sniffed the air for danger, and even when sleeping was on high alert, waking quickly by sound. The first attempt to capture him was by 2 men in a Jeep, but the boy ran. They clocked his superhuman speeds between 50 and no, it said kilometers per hour, not miles per hour. Kilometers per hour is what the video said. That seems more plausible. 50 to 55 miles per hour. Give me a break. I do not believe that at all. Engaged his leaps through the air to be as high as 13 feet. Now, I need video proof of this. This boy could run 50 to 55 miles per hour and jump 13 feet in the air. I got to see this. The boy was successfully captured at age 15, so long time. In captivity, he ate and cried like a gazelle. He eventually escaped to freedom, and nobody knows what ever happened to him. That's wild. We can watch another video if you guys want. I was thinking this one's 10 children raised by animals. The other one is 22. This one looks to be maybe a better presentation. Let's see here. The Syrian gazelle, that one's wild. Let's try this one. I actually haven't seen this one at all. I have no idea what we're getting into here.
What happens when we cut ourselves off from human interaction at a young age? How does a human function when they're not around other humans? These kids we're talking about were brought up by animals, and it's quite strange to see how much humans can adopt a different lifestyle.
22. The Ostrich Boy. Birds and humans are vastly different creatures. Even though both humans and ostriches can't fly, you can't deny they're not super similar. However, they're compatible enough on a certain level for these huge birds to be able to raise a boy. Sidi Mohammed was about 6 years old before he wandered away from his family and into an ostrich nest. The ostriches raised him, taught him, and apparently cared for him. At 12 years old, he returned to human society. 21. Baby hospital. We're not talking about a hospital ran especially for the care of babies. We're saying that's the name of the next child we're about to discuss. Named by the Italian missionary who found her, Baby Hospital was discovered in Sierra Leone, apparently raised by either monkeys or apes. She could not walk and would crawl instead, unable to stand in an upright position. As for her behavior, she cried a lot, an uncommon trait amongst feral children. 20. Boy of War. After the Ugandan Civil War caused the passing of his parents, a small boy named Robert would be forced to live in the wild. Running away from the soldiers raiding their village, Robert fled, met by vervet monkeys that would end up raising him. For 3 years, he lived amongst these primates until soldiers found him and took him back to civilization. 19. The Wolf Children of Hesse. Not just one, but a few instances of children from Hesse being raised by wolves were heard around the grapevine back in the 1300s. One of the cases took place in 1304. The story is of a boy who said he was kidnapped by wolves at the age of 3. He said himself that wolves raised him and would feed him whenever they captured prey for themselves. It doesn't seem like wolves would be the ones to take other young creatures from their homes just to raise them, so it's all a bit mysterious. 18. The Ugandan Monkey Boy. Living in a jungle for years can take a toll on a person. However, if that's all you've ever really known, maybe then it's not even weird. Take John Sebunya, the young boy who was raised by monkeys for years in the Ugandan jungle back in the 90s. Sebunya fled to the forest, running away from the traumatizing events at home, and then was taken in by vervet monkeys. After going back to human society, he was adopted and moved to Britain. 17. The Wolf Boy of Moscow. Police in Russia were in search of a boy that was dubbed Lyoka the Werewolf Boy. Found to be living with a pack of wolves in the Kaluga region, authorities took him into a clinic in Moscow to be observed. He was described to have habits like a wolf, appearing intelligent yet unable to speak a language. Though he appeared 10 years old, tests show he was a little older. Eventually, he fled from the clinic. 16. Living with cats. Back in 2008, authorities discovered a toddler in Misiones, Argentina, living with wild cats. Not only had the 1-year-old boy been in their company, it appears the cats cared for him too. They seem to have stayed on top of him or licked him during the night in order to keep him warm during the winter. The boy had been separated from his father while the two were out during the father's job. 15. The Puma Parents. Let's rewind to 1948 when a 12-year-old boy was discharged from the hospital San Vicente in Chile after being discovered living amongst pumas. Yup, pumas, as in mountain lions. How the big cats decided to raise him instead of eat him remains a mystery, though it seems the pumas reared the young boy named Vicente Cacao. Reports show that he knew how to communicate with a sort of sign language and could communicate somewhat with humans, but for the most part behaved like an animal. 14. The Guardian Dog. Ever since the age of 3 months old, a young boy named Andrei Tolstik was raised by a dog that had been keeping guard of him for about 7 years. He lived in a remote part of Siberia, which of course makes living out in the wild that much more difficult. It appears his parents abandoned him as a baby and would be discovered by social workers years later. With no interaction with humans for years, he could not speak. 13. The Real Tarzan. Technically, any of these children could be called their own versions of Tarzan or Mowgli, but what makes Saturday Mithiani more similar was that he was raised by orangutans. Near KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, the small boy was discovered residing with monkeys. Only 5 years old, he was named Saturday since that's the day he was found. Fast forward 10 years, he's still exhibiting animal-like behaviors. 12. The Nigerian Chimp Boy. In 1996, a boy of 2 years old was discovered to have been raised by chimpanzees for nearly 2 years. The Falgore forest with the chimps after being abandoned by his parents. Authorities guess his parents left him as a result of Bello being born with mental as well as physical disabilities. 11. The Mowgli Boy of Romania. After seeing her son on a television news report, Lena Calderar would claim him. The two were separated after Lena ran away from her husband's home for beating her, and she guesses the same went for her son, Trian. Police discovered the boy, who at the time was 7 years old, after a shepherd found him living in a cardboard box. He appeared to forget how to speak. Doctors guess he must have been looked over by wild dogs as an explanation to how he survived for so long. 10. A Lithuanian Bear Boy. Travel back in time to the days of the Queen of Poland from the years 1664 to 1688. In these archives show that there was only one boy reported to have lived with bears in the forests of Poland. He was apparently discovered in the wild during the spring of 1663, an interesting thing to keep record of. He would be brought to the capital city, and the rest, they say, is history. There's a story of there being 3 Lithuanian bear boys, but only one was proven true. 9. The Goat Boy of the Andes. In 1990, hikers traversing the landscape of the Andes would come across a young boy living with a herd of goats. In these Peruvian mountains, the boy appeared to have been living in the wild for about 8 years. He would drink goat's milk, eating mostly berries and roots. He didn't have any human language capabilities, though he seemed to be able to communicate effectively with goats from his herd. He only walked on all fours, callousing his hands and feet. 8. The Runaway Boy. At the age of 4 years old, Ivan Mishukov ran away from his home, where he seemed to be experiencing abuse. For refuge, he found a home in the streets, living with a pack of stray dogs after he shared food with them. They became loyal to him, letting him become the pack leader. In turn, the dogs protected him from the cold, and in Moscow, it gets really cold. He lived with the canines for 2 years. To this day, it's been said that Mishukov has lived a normal life after he came back to living with humans. 7. The Bamberg Boy. This tale goes back to the 1500s. It tells of a little boy, one who lived in Bamberg, Germany. He wasn't raised by monkeys, by wolves, or by dogs. Instead, the story goes was that he was raised by cattle. There isn't much else known about the mysterious Bamberg Boy, except for he probably ate a lot of grass. 6. Alex the Dog Boy. Once again, to modern times, a boy named Alex was found running away from police. He appeared to have lived with stray dogs and was seen shivering outside in the cold. Police tried to take him in, to which he responded by fleeing. He had a violent demeanor, said to also be inarticulate. It was later found out that this boy from Chile had been abandoned by his 16-year-old mother at the age of 5 months. Locals called him Dog Boy. 5. Raised by dogs. One of the most famous cases of being raised by animals includes that of Oksana Malaya, who is now 34 years old. Back during her childhood, she grew up with alcoholic parents. Surrounded by dogs where she lived, she started to behave like a dog. As a result, she lacked language skills and adopted the hygiene of a canine. Authorities didn't realize this was happening until she was nearly 8 years old. However, she has since grown up and is able to speak and says she wants to be treated like a human being. 4. The girl who disappeared for 40 years. When it comes to being gone, 40 years is a really long time, and that's nearly how long Nongchaidi had been missing for. She's now 50 years old, though she wasn't found until she was 42. She had been living in a jungle in India near Myanmar for decades, missing from her small village since she was only 4 years old. Apparently, she functions more or less like a normal human being, though she's been called quite shy. 3. Treated like a pet. Now that you've gotten this far down the list, have you ever wondered what it would be like if you were raised like these feral kids were raised? Perhaps you should ask someone like Natasha Mikalova, who was raised as a pet. She was discovered at 5 years old in 2009, nicknamed the Mowgli Girl. She didn't even live out in the wild, however. She lived with her father, grandparents, and other relatives, yet she was raised as if she was a dog. Natasha would drink from a bowl on the floor, had a small vocabulary, and would talk in animal noises instead. 2. The Boy Who Lived with Wolves. For 12 years, Marcos Rodriguez Pantoja resided with the wolves mostly for company. At the age of 7 years old, his father sold him to a farmer to be able to help out an old goat herd. After the old man passed away, however, Pantoja was left all alone. He finally returned to human life at the age of 19 and has been back since. Fortunately for him, the goat herd taught him to survive in the wild before he passed, which explains how Pantoja lived for so long in the wilderness. 1. Living in the jungle. One of the most famous feral children who grew up is Marina Chapman. This Colombian-born woman was kidnapped from her village and then released into the jungle not too long after. She was raised by capuchin monkeys for years until hunters found her and sold her to a brothel. After escaping the brothel, she lived on the streets, eventually becoming a slave to a mafia family. We know, this sounds like a really weird movie. In 2013, she published her autobiography with a documentary on National Geographic released the next year. She is now about 68 years old. Which of these cases of feral children seem the...
And that that last one is the one right here. The first, here it is, the first one. It's crazy because she ended up moving to England, Bradford, England, and got married. So she was the one that was as a child, was raised by capuchin monkeys in the jungles of Colombia, and then was at a brothel, then worked for a mafia family through some connection she made and some sheer luck. She managed to get to Bradford, England as a nanny, where she met her future husband and established a family. The story is so amazing that many people doubted it. However, Carlos Conde, a professor in Columbia, stated that he did a test using Chapman's reactions to photos of her adopted family and the photos of capuchin monkeys that proved that Chapman was telling the truth. Also, another scientific study on x-rays of Marina's leg bones clearly showed Harris lines. These lines indicate that she suffered severe malnutrition as a young child, most likely during the time staying with the Capuchins when her diet was very limited. National Geographic created a documentary Woman Raised by Monkeys in 2013. So you guys can actually go check that out. And so I think all these were actually all touched upon. So that's going to conclude. Oh, this one was not. The Ramachandra, the human amphibian. In yet another tragic case, Ramachandra was born sometime around 1960 in India. He was first reported in 1973 and was rescued in 1979. He was living an amphibian-like lifestyle, literally living in crocodile-infested rivers where he caught and ate raw fish. He was only partially able to adapt to human lifestyle, preferring to eat raw food and hang out along rivers. In 1982, he approached a woman, probably sexually aroused and unaware of the human taboos. The woman felt threatened by him and threw boiling water on him, ultimately killing him. And so you can see very, very strange existence. So I think that was the last one that was not mentioned. So that's going to conclude my stream on feral children raised by animals, the amazing true stories of feral children. So smash that like, guys. I want to give a special thank you to everybody who supported today's stream. Number one goes to Thomas Henderson. Thank you so much, my brother, for supporting with a $20 super chat. Very special thank you to Jesse, who threw in a $5 super chat. A very special thank you to Blue Skittle, who threw in a super chat over on the Dono chat. And I want to thank Willie Jenkins. Shout out to Willie Jenkins for showing some love and renewing his COTEL crew membership. So thank you so much, Willie Jenkins. God bless you, bro. I really do appreciate all your support. And it looks like the last super chat came in from Harry Serpanos. Shout out to Harry Serpanos. He throws in $5 and says, those who are distant from God are capable of abandoning their young to succumb to taking on the behaviors of animals. Now we have a culture that encourages us to identify even like animals. This is the degeneracy that people can fall into. Yeah, I thought about that too, about furries, people wanting to have, to piss in a litter box, all this type of stuff. I mean, that's what I mean. That's why I was using a general structure to refer to the collapsing of civilization and how becoming more animal-like. That's exactly what's happening. Civilization, despite its, its limitations, and certainly is not the end-all be-all, civilization is something that allows us to be more human due to our interaction with humans and then to build something through time. That's what civilizations are, societies, cultures. And we're watching the collapse of our civilization, and we're watching people literally becoming more animal-like. It's quite literally happening, and it's celebrated in our culture. Could be your sexual obsession, could be you literally wearing furries, could be you not identifying as a human. I just saw a video of a German person, my fiance showed me, no longer identifying as being human. Go figure. Tell me how you work that one out. I don't really understand. But we're living in times in which, people back in the day abandoned children, or some traumatic event happens, a child goes into the wild and they're raised by animals. Now people are being raised by animals just due to the people that they live around and the lack of civility, the lack of virtue, the lack of culture, the lack of morals and ethics. And it's no question then why our society is becoming more and more animalistic and people are becoming more and more like animals. I think it all makes sense. It all maps onto each other. And so it's sad. It's a sad state of affairs. But again, if we have our eyes open, we have eyes to see and ears to hear, we can sort of stay on alert for it. But yeah, it's crazy. So thank you so much for that super chat, Harry Serpanos. God bless you, brother. And another one came in from Ben Folds 5 Chairs. Thank you so much, Ben Folds 5 Chairs, for the $5 super chat. I do appreciate it. Thank you very much, brother. God bless you and yours. And thank you for the support. And let me just double check Dono chat that everything is in now. Yes. So all right. So I want to thank again everybody for the support today. Major shout out to Ben Folds 5 Chairs, Harry Serpanos, Thomas Henderson, Jesse, and of course, Willie Jenkins. Also, our Blue Skittle supporter over on Dono Chat. Thank you so much, Blue Skittle. Really appreciate your support. Blue Skittle says, I identify as Nephilim. funny profile pic too. But Blue Skittle, thank you so much, brother, for the support. I really do appreciate it. And God bless you, man. So that looks like that's going to do the stream. I wish you all a wonderful evening. Smash that like. I will be back potentially tomorrow or Wednesday. We have a couple things are up in the air. So once I hear back from some people, I'll be able to nail that down. But tentatively, it's probably leaning more towards Wednesday at this point. So we will be reunited Wednesday evening or potentially tomorrow night on an introduction to Zoroastrianism. So we're going to get into the nitty gritty and the details of that Persian religion, the first monotheism, those who worship fire, and we'll be looking at it, analyzing it, and see how it relates and is different than our Orthodox framework. So I will be back again tomorrow or Wednesday. And I have another stream, potentially 2 more. We may just do 4 streams this week. I got so many things I want to share with you guys. So we may do another one. But anyways, I will be back then. I appreciate all the support as always. Until next time, God bless.